Okay, once again, I'm Craig Schaaf, and I'm from Golden Rule Farm in Caliva, Michigan. Some really good questions came up when all you guys were out, and it triggered a lot of things that I need to say to you. In fact, we're going to go back somewhat to where we started when we talked about sticking that soil in a jar, okay, and shaking it up, and let's see what's in your soil. One of the things you need to understand about soil, okay, some of you, might come to the conclusion, well, if compost and organic matter is like the most important thing, man, I'm just going to make a garden bed just out of compost. I'm going to plant my plants in it. You'll probably get pepper plants that don't bear any peppers. You're probably going to get tomatoes that don't bear any tomatoes. You get these huge lush plants, and they're not going to bear much. There's got to be a balance. Okay, let's talk about that balance for a minute. Because in our part of the world, okay, in this temperate climate, you want an organic matter in your soil of at least 4. If you look at your soil test, you want that number to be at least 4 and hopefully up around 8. Okay, if you were in a tropical climate, it's going to be more like 3. It's really hard to keep organic matter in the soil in a tropical climate because it burns up so easily, but also it's so lush, it's creating a lot of organic matter. But in our climate, with what we're doing, we want between 4 and 8. And why is that? Okay, here's why. Once again, you got to catch this. There's 2 things that I'm aware of, okay, in soil. Well, 3 things that I'm aware of in soil. There's probably more because we're still learning a lot. I'm not the expert, but this is what I know. There's 3 things that I'm aware of in soil that will hold minerals. One is going to be a life form that dies, like bacteria or something like that, that dies, and then after it dies, it becomes consumed by another life form, and then it becomes available. Okay, another way that the soil holds minerals. Okay, actually I thought of a 4th. One is in the rocks and stuff. We talked about that earlier. Or an organic matter or plant material that needs to rot yet. That's the 2nd. The 3rd way is with clay. Okay? Now let me explain this to you. A clay soil is a richer soil than a sandy soil. But it's also a soil that's very easy to get out of balance. Do any of you have a clay soil? Raise your hand. Do any of you have a clay soil that's so bound up and tight that it's just, you can't barely dig through it? I have the answer for you. You're going to love me after today. Okay? And Steve Solomon is the one that taught this in his book, so I can't take credit for this. But when I read this, I thought, oh, the answer is so easy. I work as a soil consultant at times going to farms and stuff, and because I'm on sandy soil, I'm not that familiar with clay soils. And I would get to these farms that had this clay soil that was all bound up tight, and they had double dug their soil, and we're going to talk about that. They had double dug their soil and loosened it, and the next year it was just all bound up again. You don't even have to dig barely the soil to figure this out. Your soil has too much magnesium. Why does it have too much magnesium? Now try to follow me, okay? All elements, if you look at the periodic table that we studied in school, do you remember how all the different elements had either positive or negative charges? Okay? If an element has a positive charge, it can stick to clay. Now, the stronger the charge, it'll trump it. When you play the whole game with the rocks and the scissors, certain things can trump other things, okay? If you have a soil that has too much magnesium and you got a clay soil, it's all bound up. You don't have enough calcium. You get the right amount of calcium in there, the bond of calcium is stronger than the bond of magnesium. You put the right amount of calcium in that soil, you know what'll happen? It'll literally wipe away the magnesium, replace the bond with calcium, and your soil will open right up. Yeah, balance. There's too much magnesium. So when you get your soil test back, I can guarantee you, if you get your soil test back and you got a soil that's all bound up, that you're going to see that it has too much magnesium. But if you go now and you say, okay, I need calcium, so you go out and you say, I'm going to get a form of calcium, I'm going to get dolomitic lime. Bad choice. Why? Because dolomitic lime's got a lot of magnesium in it. So that's why I would encourage you to get a soil test done and then start to learn how some of these different amendments affect the soil. You're going to want, I've got a high magnesium sandy soil, and what I chose for my calcium source was a local source of limestone, natural limestone. It's low magnesium limestone, and it's a great way to add calcium to my soil. Okay? Now, so clay has that ability to hold on to elements that have a positive charge. Humus, what is humus? Humus is the organic matter when you take and you make a compost pile of all that straw and that manure and the lettuce stems and the cabbage leaves and all that stuff, and you make the proper ratio. They're going to teach you today how to make that proper ratio, I'm assuming, in the composting section. But when you make that right ratio and you make good compost, what happens is that compost, as it breaks down, it becomes something that's stable, that's called humus. Okay, it's that black fudge, really silty, really smooth, beautiful organic matter. As you watch your soil become darker and darker, your organic matter and your humus content is getting higher and higher. If your soil is less than 4% organic matter, you can't hold on to your minerals properly. Okay, now, if your soil has less than 4% organic matter in our temperate climate, you can't hold on to the soil minerals and the elements properly. Okay? Humus has the ability to hold on to positive and negatively charged elements. So if you have a soil that is poor, when I started in our farm and I took one of my first soil tests, I had 1.1% organic matter. Yeah, I needed rock powders, big time, because I didn't have a lot of humus or clay to hold on to anything I was going to put in there. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to focus on bringing that organic matter up, and there's different ways to do that. You can add compost to your soil. That will raise that organic matter content. You can be very careful not to dig your soil and disturb your soil when it's hot. If you're going to do digging and you're going to do a lot of soil preparation, try to do it when it's cool. Because the warmer it is, the more organic matter you'll burn up. John Jevons, I heard him share one time that there was a potato farm in Maine that broke new ground on soil that had 12% organic matter. And when they broke ground and they tilled the ground to prepare it for potatoes, they took another soil test and it was 6% organic matter. They burned up 6% of their organic matter because of how harsh their tilling was of the soil. If you use a rototill, use it as a bone acre, okay? Don't use it in your garden. Now, this is controversial what I'm about ready to say to you, okay? Rototills are one of the worst things you can use in your garden because what you're doing is you feel so good because when you get done, you got this super light, fluffy, perfect garden soil behind you. You just feel so good. You just want to sit down and just stare at your garden for a while. What you're doing, literally, if you could see it with your eyes, you've got carbon and nitrogen and everything just right up into the air that you can't perceive. If you walk into a barn and your eyes water from the amount of ammonia, you are standing in the barn of someone who's a very poor steward. You should walk into any barn. I don't care if it's a pig barn, I don't care if it's a chicken barn, and you should not have any offensive smell with that manure present. If there's any offensiveness to it, you're not using enough carbon. The ammonia is nitrogen that has become volatile and gone into the atmosphere. If you could see the amount of nitrogen going into the atmosphere in $20 bills going before your eyes, people would fall on their knees in repentance. Why? Because we serve money, don't we? Money gets our attention. Money gets our attention. But yet, nitrogen is so important, especially good natural forms of nitrogen like that. So if you're composting and you're adding these different soil amendments to your soil, the next thing I want to talk about is double digging. Because, you know, you could come up with this unbelievable soil in the top 3 or 4 inches and have hard pan down 5-6 inches, just impermeable hard pan, and you're not going to get any quality of plants. Okay? Now, what I'm about ready to share with you is work. Anybody here afraid to work? Okay? Now, there's some honest people in this room. Now, there are also limitations on our health at times in regards to what you can do. If you have grandsons, okay, or you got a little boy that lives next door, or even a young lady that lives next door, double digging is not hard. Okay, it's not hard to do if it's done properly, but it's work. It's work. But once you've done it, and you take care of your soil properly, it's actually, some people call it the lazy man's gardening. You wouldn't know it the first day, but after you get it done, it's the lazy man's gardening. I have very little weeding that I ever do. The number one comment that I get when people come to our farm is, where are your weeds? Is that true, Ann? People are all the time saying, where are your weeds? If you have a weedy garden, you're not taking care of your soil properly. If you use a rototill, you're pulverizing the mycelia, you're pulverizing all your worms, you're stirring up all that organic matter, you're burning up your organic matter. What you're doing is you're bringing up your seed bank. You're just bringing up a new flush of seeds. There are seeds in your soil that are going to be there for hundreds of years that'll germinate. Every time you stir your soil radically, you're just bringing up a whole new series of them. You want a good cover crop and not have to purchase any seed, just stir your soil up. You'll have a great cover crop. It's good stuff. It's there for a reason. If you're a poor steward of your soil, that's why they're there, because that'll cover your soil for you. If you're not a good soil steward, you don't want to garden the way I garden. Because I literally, on one of my beds about 4 years ago, we pulled carrots, and carrots disturb the soil quite a bit. But we pulled a whole bed of carrots and got them to market, and I couldn't get a cover crop put on that soil fast enough. This was bad stewardship on my part. That soil stayed uncovered for a month or more. 3 weeds. And this was an area of 180 square feet, and there was 3 weeds that germinated. Our soil care for weeds is so effective that if I'm a poor steward, it's bad. Those weeds come up for a reason, okay? Hold your question till later. So I'm going to teach you how to double dig, okay? And I'm going to try to instruct you how to double dig in a way that you'll use your body in the wisest way you can. We're going to keep interjecting that word today, wise, okay? Now, for your double digging, you're going to need a digging spade and a digging fork. Some people call it a potato fork, where you'll have the forks are about this long, about that wide. You got tines that come down. So a lot of times they'll have a D handle at the top. You can step on it and do things with it. A digging spade is usually about that long. It's got a flat bottom. It's not your pointed shovel, and it's not curved. It's more of a flat back, and it's a flat bottom, okay? And what I'm going to do is, let's say I want to dig a garden bed that's 100 square feet. Because, you know, when you're figuring out how much amendments to apply and you're figuring out how many plants and stuff, sometimes it's nice to have your garden beds in an equivalent of, let's say, 100 square feet or 1,000 square feet or something like that. That way, when you're doing math for spreading minerals and stuff, it's easy to do the math, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off an area that's, let's say, 4 foot wide and 25 foot long. 25 times 4 is 100. So I got 100 square feet. Now, my mind is going in 20 different directions at this moment. I'd like to teach you how to water. I'd like to teach you. There's so many things I want to teach you. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a wooden stake in the ground in each corner, and I'm going to wrap a carpenter string around it, and I'm going to mark off the side of the bed. And I'm going to take my digging spade, and I'm going to go along that string, and I'm going to push it in along the string, and I'm going to push into the bed. And I'm going to make a divot in the ground that I can see. And I'm just going to go along the edge. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm marking the perimeter of my bed. I don't want that string there because I don't want to be tripping over it. I don't want to have to worry about it. Okay, so I'm going to take the string down after I get the perimeter done. Now, you can make these beds as wide as you want. You see how tall I am, okay? I prefer a 6-foot wide bed. Most of you would, Ann's over here, no way. I know Bob's probably tried to talk her into doing 6-foot wide beds, but she's not going to be tall. Yeah, now, you should do the biggest that you're comfortable with. I can take most people's gardens and make them 1/12 of what they are right now and give you as big a yield and better than what you've got right now. The bigger the bed that you use, the more growing area you have. So if I have a 6-foot wide bed and a walking path and a 6-foot wide bed and a walking path, that's a vast improvement over a row of plants and a walking path, a row of plants and a walking path. In America, why did we create this form of gardening that has a row of plants and a walking path? Cultivation with a tractor. That's where that comes from. Cultivation with horses, cultivation with a tractor, being able to run machinery and stuff down through there. If you're doing hand labor, you can literally garden in a fraction of the area. I knew of a German man that lived not far from us. His preferred size bed was 10 foot wide. He had beautiful, beautiful garden. Okay, and you'll learn to work a bed that's wider. Start out probably around 4 feet for most of you. Okay, but in time, try to get to 5 foot and see. You guys use 5s, don't you?
6.
You do use 6. So you've been kicking and screaming this whole time then. You use 4?
We use 4 at the farm.
We got both.
It depends. Yeah. Okay. So basically what you want to do is use the widest bed that you can. And I'm going to try to quickly tell you why. The more plant growth you have in an area together, where the plants are spaced at the right spacing, and there's so much I want to teach you, but I can't. The more plants you have close together, you're choking out weeds, you're retaining moisture, you're creating a canopy over your soil that is literally utilizing the carbon dioxide and the oxygen the best it can be used. You've got to see your soil as a living organism. The looser your soil is and the deeper that soil is loose, that soil has to breathe. All these 6 billion microbes per teaspoon that are down there in your soil, they got to breathe. They need oxygen. What do plants give off? Oxygen. Good, clean air. And so what do you have just over the surface of that soil? A beautiful canopy of oxygen-laden soil. So that can flow down into the soil. The soil life breathes. What does it give out? Carbon dioxide. That is what's being brought out of the soil, and where does it come up into? Into a nice lush growth of foliage. If you were to see our carrot beds, we'll get 300 pounds of carrots on about 100 to 120 square feet. Okay? And if you were to see them, I've got a carrot every 2 to 3 inches on the bed. And the carrot foliage is just solid over that bed. It's just gorgeous. And these carrots get up to 24 inches long. We commonly pull carrots that are 16 to 18 inches. Okay? But the reason why is the double digging. How do I make most people's gardens 1/12 of what it is right now? Widen your bed and get rid of so many paths. Now you've got less soil to nurture and take care of and less weeding. The next thing you need to do is you need to double dig. Because when I started farming, and this is farming, this is not gardening. When I started farming, I was told through reading John Jevons' book, How to Grow More Vegetables, he said that if you will double dig, you'll get twice the yield of someone that doesn't double dig. Okay? Man alive, that's a lot of work. This is a big area. So what we did is we did like just this one, probably 1/3 to 1/4 of our garden area that we were farming in, we double dug. And I am a analytical, write down the notes, look things at it, and really try to prove things out individual. Okay, so I'm watching. I'm planting carrots on these beds that are double dug. I'm planting carrots on these beds where my neighbor came in with the John Deere tractor with the tiller and tilled it down fluffy 9 inches, and it was hard pan below that. And by the way, the organic matter was gone. I had started with 1.1. What do you think that soil was like after that? Okay, my carrots over here were this long. Why? Because that's how much room I gave them to grow. The carrots in the double dug beds, and that big around and tender. Okay? I water. I'm going to get into watering because you got to learn this. I water everything like carrots and parsnips and parsley and all the root crops and stuff, things that love to be cold and wet. I water them every evening a little bit. Anything that struggles with foliage disease, I only water it once a week, a full inch. And I water them in the morning where the sun's going to burn it off the leaves. Okay? Now, double digging. Let's just say that this is our bed, this table right here. And we've already marked the edge, we've dug down to the perimeter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to dig. So I'm going to bring a wheelbarrow or some buckets. And let's say it's a wheelbarrow. I'm going to wheel the wheelbarrow down here. I'm going to set it right here at the end of the bed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take with my digging spade and I'm going to create a trench that's about 1 foot wide by the width of the bed, the depth of your topsoil. Some of you have topsoil that's 6 inches deep. Some of you have soil that's 16 inches deep. Topsoil. Topsoil is that nice, hopefully darker soil on top. Okay? It's not always that way, but it's hopefully darker. And then the subsoil is where you can see that change, where it gets noticeably sandier or a different color. Subsoil is important. There are things in the subsoil the plant needs, and if it can't get to it, they won't have it. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this topsoil and you're going to take your digging spade and you're going to remove that topsoil and you're going to set it in the wheelbarrow or in the buckets if you choose to use buckets. And you're going to open up this trench and now you can see the subsoil down there. Now, if you really want to do this right, and I'm not putting this on anybody that they have to do this, but you really want to do this right, before you're going to double dig your beds, dig down to your subsoil and test your subsoil. Totally different soil test. And mix up a batch of minerals for your subsoil. And when you get to your subsoil, what you're going to do is you're going to take that mineral blend and you're going to sprinkle it over that subsoil. And you're going to take your digging fork and you're going to step on your digging fork down in that trench and you're going to pull back on it. And you're going to lift that tines through that soil and you're going to loosen that subsoil. Now, if you want to take it one step further, even better, apply some organic matter. Some leaf mold, some compost. What I like to do, especially with a poor topsoil, I like to take and create what I almost call a diaper of humus right down on top of that subsoil. Because I know if I got 1% organic matter, my minerals are getting lost. So if I can create a layer of organic matter and humus right there, anything that's getting leached out of my soil can get grabbed up and saved. Okay? So what I do is I put the minerals down, I lift with the tines, I let the minerals kind of sift down in, then I put that diaper on top of that. So if anything's going to leach through, it can get caught potentially. Okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig my next trench right next to it. And I'm going to take that topsoil and I'm going to put it loosened right on top of that loosened subsoil here. And I'm going to do the same thing to this subsoil. And I'm going to just work my way down the bed. Are you following me? Now, when I went to California 3 years ago and I took John Jevons' 3-day workshop. And one of the things he taught us, he took us out on the farm and he showed us how to double dig. How many of you know what Aikido is or have ever heard of Aikido? Aikido is a form of martial arts. Okay, it specializes in how to use the weight of your body to accomplish the most possible. And John went to an Aikido master specifically to learn how to double dig. And it was impressive watching John double dig. In fact, he sat on the soil next to us and would watch us, and as we double dig, if we did something that wasn't quite right, rather than stopping us and trying to explain it to us, he would go beep. It was pretty interesting. I'd be like, what did I do? You know? But as we were doing this, he told us a story of this man and this woman that were in his class. And this guy showed him his class. He's just this huge, bulky, muscular guy. And he just saw things coming, you know. And he had to pick 2 people to kind of demonstrate for the class how to do it and this and that. And he got these 2 beds going. And he put this one huge macho guy in this one bed. He took this little old lady. He put her on this other bed. And he just sensed that this lady was going to be patient and careful to do everything just right. This guy started out and the soil was flying and he's going down through the bed. He gets halfway through the bed. I don't remember the distance he got, but he was just wiped out. And this little lady, she's just carefully doing all of her little Aikido movements and everything. She surpasses him, gets all the way down to the end of the bed, and she feels better than when she started. Okay? I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, if I could tell you the number of times I see people use tools to hurt themselves, okay? I'm going to talk about a U-bar here in a little bit. I had a woman come to my farm. A U-bar is a broad fork. It's a fork that's got tines that go down with 2 handles. And she came to my farm and she was just belly aching at me for this U-bar and how it was wiping her out. And she came on the day I was going to teach double digging and stuff and I show her how to use the U-bar. And I said, well, you just sit front and center and you just watch. And I knew what was going to happen. And as I used the U-bar, I stepped on it, I leaned back, I brought the soil up, and I lifted it up, and I just dragged it over the soil. Her head went. Why? Because every time she used that tool, she picked it up, walked backwards, and set it down. Do you realize what she was putting her body through every time she picked that up? You gotta learn to be very wise. Okay, in regards to how you use your muscles. You can accomplish a lot more work if you just learn how to do it wisely. Okay, so when you're using the spade, what I do is I step on the spade and I tuck that D handle right in here. And all you're doing is you're shifting your weight forward. If you're doing, you're hurting yourself. Now, if you got hard packed soil and you're starting out with this and this is not old garden soil that needs to be double dug, then you might have to give it a bit of a thump, okay? So I'm not saying you're just going to sink in there, okay? But use your body to shift your weight as much as you can. And then when you come down in and you come to that, okay, step back, put your hand on the handle, use your body weight to begin to lift the shovel, grab the handle, bend your knees, come up, and as you're coming up, tip this hand and let the soil roll off the shovel. If you can learn to do that, now this was recorded, so you can go back and listen to this again, okay? You're shifting your weight forward. You're using your weight to begin to lift the shovel. You're grabbing it, you're bending your knees, straightening your back. You're coming straight up, and as you come up, just let the soil, if you do this, that's what that guy was doing. And he was wiped out. He's huge. But this little old lady surpassed him. Why? Because she listened. Okay? She listened. Let it roll off. Then when you use the digging fork, your fork is down in the trench. And you're going to stand here, you're going to put your foot on the fork, and you're just going to shift your weight, just like this. And if it doesn't go all the way in, it's this simple. Just go, and it'll sink right down in. You don't have to do any of this. You don't. You don't. Just go like this. It'll sink all the way in, and this is the best part. And this, if you do this right, your back feels wonderful. This has got to be some kind of yoga movement to this. I don't know anything about yoga. But at any rate, you grab the fork once it's inserted down in, you bend your back like this, and you just walk backwards, bringing it down. Oh, it feels so good. Even right now. You wouldn't believe there's something with your back muscles in that move and going backwards and bringing that fork down. And then you come back up. You've not lifted the fork. You drag the fork back 9 inches. You stand on it. You shift your weight. You push forward a little bit. If it doesn't go all the way in, it just drops in. You bend that back and just bring it down. And it feels so good. Now you see on my description to you, do you see how little work you're not doing that you would tend to do? I'm not saying it's not work, but most people double dig in such a way that it ends up hurting them rather than really helping them. Okay? Not everybody here is going to be able to double dig beds. Okay? I'm not even trying to give you that impression. But if you will loosen your soil down 24 inches, we've grown 41-inch parsnips at our farm in these beds. Okay, I've got a picture of Josiah, one of my sons, holding on to a parsnip, and the parsnip just goes way over his head and stuff. I mean, we double dug that area. I kept records. John was right. We got double the yield on the double dug beds. You want to know what? Every bed on my farm at this moment, between 9 and 10,000 square feet of bed space, everything is double dug. And it's taken time. We didn't accomplish that in a weekend, I can tell you that. But you can accomplish this. Let's say this summer, in 5 months, 6 days out of the week, you walk out to your garden and you double dig 2 feet. Just 2 feet. Okay? That's about, let's say, between 120, 150 days, depending on how you want to figure it out. But let's say you just did 100 days at 2 feet. How much bed space did you accomplish? You've accomplished a lot. You've accomplished 200 foot of bed space, lengthwise. And if your beds are 4 foot wide, you've got a big garden at this point that's double dug. And 2 feet is nothing. Anybody, almost anybody I know, could go out and do it. And that exercise every single day would make a big difference in anybody's life, and going out there and doing that. So at any rate, I want to encourage you in that. If you want to see double digging done, if you go to Ecology Action's website that John Jevons has, they'll actually show an example of double digging.
What was the website?
Ecology Action. And then Bountiful Gardens is their seed catalog, and they've got really good, lots of rare seeds and stuff, grains and different things. Now let me talk to you about sustainability for a moment. I actually don't like the word sustainable. It's a very poor choice of words. If I would have gotten my initial soil test at 1.1% organic matter and high magnesium and nothing else, practically, and I would have maintained that, so that from here on out, anybody ever took a soil test at Golden Rule Farm, I got at least 1.1% organic matter, and I didn't lose any magnesium, which I needed to. I was sustained. I was sustaining what I had. I don't like the word sustainable. It's the way our culture greenwashes everything. Okay? Use the word regenerative. Now you've got your culture in a real fix. Because if you use the word regenerative, now we got a problem. Regenerative means that it's better than what you started with. It's regenerating. It's getting better and better. Did you know you can actually grow a crop, and at the end of the season, your soil can be better than when you started? If you understand how to grow regeneratively. Now, there is what I call the 60-30-10 rule. And this rule, our culture does not understand at this point. And it's going to seem foreign to you. How many of you actually grow a grain in your garden? Okay, now of course corn's a grain. How many of you grow corn? So some of you weren't necessarily thinking on the terms, but most people don't think about growing grains in their garden, other than maybe corn, and probably sweet corn. You didn't grow field corn that you're going to grind for masa or tortillas or whatever. Now, the 60-30-10 rule is this. 60% of your garden space or your farm space should be growing high carbon crops. Okay? Do you realize that if you grow a corn plant, 90-some% of what you see with your eyes of that corn plant came out of thin air? And how is that? Because what happens is when a tree grows, when a plant grows, what does it do? It takes carbon dioxide, it sequesters carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it within its tissues. Okay? The way that you're going to grow soil and build soil and get organic matter, the only way you can do it regeneratively is to produce that carbon on your farm. Now, 80 to 90%, different people differ on their percentages, but 80 to 90%, let's say it's 80% of organic agriculture is not even sustainable, let alone regenerative. Why is that? Okay, my farm has been a prime example. I'll tell you just how unsustainable our farm has been. It's as unsustainable as our whole agricultural system. Okay, I order a semi-load of compost from, there's a number of people I could buy it from, but I order this semi-load of compost that comes to my farm. That organic matter in that compost was mined from another field. This compost is probably made out of cow manure that came out of a CAFO from a dairy farm. What fed those cows was organic matter and nutrients that came out of a farmer's field. That went through the cow, it was in the manure was taken with fossil fuels. By the way, all the crop and everything was raised with fossil fuels. But that manure was loaded into a truck, trucked somewhere with fossil fuels. It was unloaded with fossil fuels. It was made into compost with fossil fuels. Remember the 12 men working for us 40 hours a week for free, basically? Okay. It was shipped there with fossil fuels. It was made with fossil fuels. It was loaded into a truck, trucked to my farm with fossil fuels. I'm the only situation out of the whole thing where we are digging by hand into a bucket, compost, pulling it around in garden carts and dumping it by hand on the garden beds. Now, I'm still indicted in this situation yet. I'm not out of it yet. I take the tomatoes that we harvest, I drive with fossil fuels to Traverse City, I deliver them to the restaurant, they cook with a fossil fuel, the people drive to the restaurant with a fossil fuel, they drive home after eating with a fossil fuel, they take it, and not to be crude, but to be honest, we want the truth again, right? We flush it down the toilet with potable drinking water. Unheard of in probably 90% of the world. We flush it down the toilet with potable drinking water, and we mix it with pharmaceuticals, paint residues, and everything else that we can't get out of the water, and it doesn't return back to the field. A lot of times it ends up going into the landfill. I have just described to you a system that I have been a part of, that you could call me organic, but not regenerative. Why have I had to do this? Because I'm shipping off huge amounts of organic matter from my farm. I have to mine minerals and organic matter from somewhere else for me to be able to keep this thing going. Do you understand why we're in the situation we're in now? Okay, there's a law there are laws. Are there laws? And I mean natural laws. Are there natural laws? If I took you up to the roof of this building, we went to the edge, and I said, I would like you to jump off. Are you going to oblige me? No. Why? Because you've understood something called the law of gravity. You understand that it bites that quick. You want to know what? There is a law that bites just as severely, but takes longer. And it's called the law of return. And our whole nation has not understood this law, but it bites just as severely. Do you realize the Sahara Desert was the breadbasket of Rome? I could name off desert after desert after desert that were breadbaskets of major cultures. And if you understand that in the world right now, in the year 2000, in 1980, the average organic matter in the soil in the world was at 2% organic matter. Remember when I told you have to have 4% to hold your minerals? The average soil now in the world, agricultural soil in the world, right now is at 1.2% organic matter. Why is that? Because we're not regenerative. We don't regenerate soil. We're not sustainable, let alone regenerative. And I don't care if you call yourself organic. I don't care what label you put on it. But at the end of the day, if your farm utilizes more from somewhere else and steals from somewhere else to accomplish its end, you're part of an agricultural system that will not be around eventually. Okay? So I'm passionate. Can you tell I'm passionate about regenerative? You have to start thinking in terms of regenerative. The 60-30-10 rule. 60% of your crop space has to be growing a high carbon crop. Wheat, oats, barley, amaranth, teff, sunflower, any crop that creates a huge amount of sequestered carbon in it. Why? Because you're going to take that carbon and you're going to compost it. And because that carbon was sequestered on your solar panel, your land is a solar panel. Do you realize that? If you leave that solar panel unused and leave it bare ground, shame on you. Keep that solar panel covered at all times with something green, and you're sequestering carbon all the time. Something that sequesters a lot of carbon. All right, but you can't live off just grains. 30% of your bed space is going to grow root crops. But these are high calorie root crops. Carrots don't count. They're too low calories. You're going to grow parsnips, you're going to grow potatoes, sweet potatoes, garlic, onions. Those are things that are really high in calories and give you a lot of calories per square foot. And then the next thing you're going to do, 10% of your bed space is going to be growing vegetables, which you're used to growing. It's only 10% of the space. Because really what you need vegetables for are what? Minerals, vitamins and minerals. And you don't need a huge, enormous amount of it. And you get vitamins and minerals from these other things. But if you have a growing space that only grows vegetables year after year after years, vegetables are the most harsh plants that you can put into your garden. They're very, very heavy feeding, and they're very, very harsh on the soil. And you have to start to learn how to grow carbon crops, grains and stuff on your land. So, and I know what I'm presenting to you, you probably won't hear this from hardly anybody else than maybe other than John Jevons. Right now, we are literally having this fossil fuel drunken party. I'm not exaggerating. We're having a fossil fuel drunken party right now, and we could give a rip about the law of return. That law will be enacted, and it will hit us just as surely as the law of gravity. You have to understand how to sequester carbon on your land and how to build soil without depending on other means. Whether it's going to be you or your children, that law will come into play. You cannot have the average agricultural soil in the world at 1.2% organic matter and not have it be relatively soon. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm trying to give you the truth. So that's how we become wise, is by understanding the truth. Now, double digging, soil amendments. I get this soil test back. Let's say I've double dug my soil the year before. I grew a crop in it. I'm not going to walk on that bed. I'm always going to stay on my path. That's where I'm going to walk. And on that path, from that path, I'm going to do my weeding. I'm going to do anything I need to do with planting. And if, let's say, my second year after that bed's been double dug, the springtime, let's say it's right now, I want to loosen that soil again, but I don't want to disturb it greatly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool called a U-bar, or a broad fork. And what this is it's a bar. It can be 30 inches wide, 24 inches wide is what most of them are. And the tines go down in from where 9. I've got a U-bar that has 18-inch tines. I tried 24 once, and it won't work. You don't have enough leverage. No human has enough leverage to make a 24-incher come up through. But the 18 is like the max. And you got to be fairly strong. A 14 is what I commonly use, and my children can use it. Okay, so a 14-inch long tine is what we use a lot of times. And what you do is you hold the handles, and you just step on these tines down into the soil. And all you simply do is pull back on it and bring it down. Just like that. And the tines will come up. And what you're doing is you're lifting the soil. You're aerating the soil without stirring it radically. And by doing that, what are you doing? These tines are about this far apart. So by doing that, you're keeping your soil aggregates clumped, which is important because we've got mycelia, we've got things that are going on down there we don't want to pulverize. But we want to inject enough air, though, so that the roots and everything are getting enough air, and the life are going to get enough air down deeper. And what you'll find is, if you came to my farm during that soil seminar and that tool seminar in April, and I were to show you one of our newer beds, and I had you step on a U-bar, and I had you go like this with it, and then I walked you over to one of our beds that are like 9, 10 years old, and I had you do it, you get a startled look on your face. You would feel, it's the difference of a fine cheese or American cheese. It's the difference between a really good wine versus something that's not very well aged. I mean, there's a feel to soil that's been nurtured, and it'll give you goosebumps. And my soil's not even very old. I mean, Elliot's working with soil that's 20, 30 years old. You know, we ought to be working with soil that's thousands of years old that's been nurtured. Wouldn't that be incredible of a gift to have received from your culture? That's my hope, and I want to give. Now, why don't we do questions? Because I think the questions are going to draw out some important points.
Okay,
So,
and if there's anything, yeah.
remember, you got to stand up, you give your question.
And shout it out. I got a question.
Go ahead.
Shout it out. So what do you do about blight?
About blight? Late blight, it just depends on what kind of blight.
Tomato.
Yeah, tomato blights, early blights, or different kinds of blights. Again, pest and disease, stressed plants. Usually, if I have tomato plants that have been highly stressed, and my tomato plants get highly stressed, because we've produced vine-ripe tomatoes without supplemental heat other than the sun by April 4th, April 24th. Okay? And that's why we've been so successful as a farm. We produce really early fruit. We produce commercial quantities of tomatoes in May. But if you're going to produce tomatoes that early, you got stressed plants. Our plants almost always get some kind of disease because they're stressed. Okay? If you're dealing with blight, then you're dealing with plants that are quite stressed and are lacking some feed. If you're hopefully, if year after year you're dealing with something like that, I would encourage you to start alternating between a compost tea and a fish kelp emulsion tea. Do the kelp 1 week, do the kelp fish 1 week, and the compost the next, and alter between them. And if you start to see powdery mildew on anything, peas, squash, anything like that, mix up 1 part goat milk, raw goat milk, and 9 part water. And you will see that powdery mildew come at bay. So foliage diseases, what you want to do with foliage diseases is try to get, just like the soil has life in it, your skin, if you could see the stuff on your skin, you'd be like, ah. It's the same thing on the leaf of those plants. There's all sorts of life on there. If you get so many good guys on those leaves, when the bad guys get present, there's something there to nab them. And I want to say this one thing. This is really important. Pest and disease are not our enemy. I don't try to get rid of all my potato beetles. I purposely allow a certain level of potato beetles in my potatoes, and they do not overwhelm my potatoes. Why? Because I got assassin beetles. And those assassin beetles are out there stabbing these things and sucking the juices out. Why should I have to mess with them? I got beetles out there that'll do it for me. But if I use chemicals to kill the potato beetles, you'll kill the assassin beetles as well. You're always dependent on those chemicals. Find a balance. You got to have rabbits to keep the fox around. You got to have a hunter or a trapper around to keep the fox at bay, or they'll kill your chickens. You've got to have a diversity. Another question.
I have blackberries, and I'm fighting either the bears or the birds.
Okay.
What am I doing? What can I do?
Well, with the birds, I would try putting a mesh over the plants. Some pests and disease, some pests are very attracted to mineral-dense food. I mean, when she was talking about her rabbits and deer, if you grow super high mineral-dense kale, it might keep your aphids away, but it's not going to keep the deer away. It's going to be a magnet for them. So if you're dealing with bears and stuff like that, bears, now we're dealing with where you're probably going to need some kind of an electric shock. And what I would do is I would counsel you to study what beekeepers do to keep bears out of their yards with the solar chargers, with a wire at just the right height. Once they get nipped in the nose with that wire, it keeps them out pretty good. Not always. But they'll probably be kept out of blackberries better than honey. They would probably go through way more gymnastics to get honey than they would blackberries. So.
You talked about the U-bar, and you also said don't walk on your bed. So do you U-bar from the walk? Okay.
So when I'm U-barring, because I'm lifting the whole soil column, that is one case in which I'll walk on my bed. If you have a need to walk on your bed, you can make a digging board, which is a piece of plywood, maybe a 1/2 inch thick or so. That's the width of your bed. That's maybe 3 foot wide. And then like if you want to use a 6 foot wide bed and you want to be out there planting on it, put the digging board down. You can sit right down on the board, do your planting, back the board, step off the bed, back the board up, and just keep working your way back. That's how John Jevons would teach at his farm. So there was another question back here.
On the watering system, do you water from top down or down up?
I water everything by hand. and I water, I told you what I did earlier, all the cool loving stuff every evening unless it rains, and then an inch of water unless I get an inch of water once a week for the stuff that doesn't want to be wet, the warm loving stuff, or the foliage disease stuff. But I did tests years ago. I used soaker hoses, I used drip tape, I used sprinklers, and if I hand water, my yield is so much higher, I could pay myself $30 an hour hand watering. All right, let me take another question.
Is it good to put marigold flowers in your vegetable garden if you have like a raised bed?
Sure. You know, marigolds are nice. Some pests don't like them. The flowers sometimes are pleasantly edible, sometimes not so pleasantly edible. It depends on the variety. But diversity. Get that diversity in there. And boy, diversity is so much nicer to look at, isn't it? Right here.
How do you get rid of grubs?
Well, let me say this. How many of you struggle with cutworms in the spring? They come in, they just start cutting everything off. Your cutworms are a fall moth that lay their eggs in the fall on vegetation. If you start getting into hoop house growing and you start doing salad greens in the winter, I got news for you. You're in for cutworm bonanza come spring. If you're come spring going to try early tomatoes, you're going to have to literally have some sacrificial plants. And what I encourage you to do is I would put out cabbage plants. They love cabbage seedlings. I would sow about 100 cabbage seedlings, and I would have them ready 2 weeks before your tomato plants are going to go in, and I would transplant them in your hoop house. And then anything that a cutworm takes, that cutworm has to stay just under the soil, and he'll be balled up right by the plant there. You just fish around the plant, and you'll get him out and kill him. Okay? But they'll come through and they'll just mow down those cabbage plants, but you'll catch them. But that's a whole lot better than a tomato seedling that's like that you've worked for 8 weeks or 9 weeks to grow. So
I'm wondering if you're enlarging your garden, so it's just been in grass for years and years, and you don't rototill, you can do that with the U?
With the double digging and then use the U-bar. You're never going to break ground with the U-bar. It's not designed for that.
Okay.
You want to double dig first.
So, okay.
Now let me say this. Start out small. No, this is totally serious. Start out small and learn to grow as much food as you possibly can in the tiniest area as you can. And then when you got extra time on your hands, get bigger. Because most people, what they do is they have what they call planting the garden that happens on one day of the year in May, right? You go out, you sow a 150-foot row of lettuce out of one packet. You eat about this much of it, of the row. The rest of it all just gets wasted and gone to seed. I mean, read Mel Bartholomew's book on square foot gardening. He would be a great one to talk you down to getting your garden smaller. But read John Jevons and figure out how to get the plant population such with the double digging. If you were to study what the French Parisian gardeners did in the 1800s, outside in France, outside of Paris and stuff, it was amazing. They would have literally sometimes 7 to 8 different crops go through a square foot of soil in a growing season. They would put onions in multi-plants, 4 plants, 12 inches apart when they were tiny. They would put rows of radishes here. They would put a lettuce plant right here. The lettuce would come up. The lettuce would be harvested. The onions would need the extra space. The radishes are long gone before the lettuce is ready. When that lettuce is harvested, they've already got cauliflower transplants ready. They put the cauliflower transplant in. There's plenty of light coming through the onions. They harvest the onions. The cauliflower starts coming up. I mean, if you're an analytical person like me, I get goosebumps playing around with stuff like that. It's fun. Some of you guys are like, this guy's a nutcase. But if you can start to think in terms of how to squeeze every little crop you can out of every square foot, you're going to work a lot less hard. You're not going to have so much soil to amend, to water, to weed, and you're going to enjoy it a whole lot better than you will when you get this enormous space and you're too pulled in every direction. You're not doing it well. And it gets overrun with weeds and you get discouraged and you quit. Does that sound familiar? That's the American thing. Any more questions?
Use grass clippings in my flower beds to keep the weeds down. Is it a good thing to do that in your vegetable garden too?
I'd be careful with grass clippings for a few reasons. One is they tend to compact and get slimy, and they don't let air go through. I don't use plastics on my soil The only time I use plastic on my soil is maybe like a solar mulch to warm it up for a crop that's coming, then I pull the solar mulch off. But plastic does not allow the soil to breathe. All those billions of critters have to have air. And if you put a layer of plastic over it, you're just not going to get the air penetration.
No, grass clippings.
Yeah, but grass clippings are the same way. Grass clippings mat down so much. Now, if you mix the grass clippings with leaves, shredded leaves, or some other forms of organic matter, stuff that was more rough, that would lend a little more air into it, kind of a mix, that would probably be better. But the best thing to do with the grass clippings, because they're high in nitrogen, would be to make compost out of them. Because if you lay the grass clippings down, all that nitrogen becomes volatile and is gone, where that nitrogen is so important to be able to kickstart your compost and to make it properly.
So use leaves and grass clippings in the compost.
Yeah, and you want to be careful with leaves because they do mat down too. You want to be careful with leaves in a compost pile that you don't put too much in one area because they tend to mat down and become airless again. And a compost pile needs to breathe so that it's aerobic and not anaerobic. So
Folks, we
that
need
was
to-
it.